Hello everyone and welcome to our latest Inspiring Women in Technology webinar where we are in conversation today with Dr Kristen Weatherby. I'm Sophie Burton-Jones, a partner in the commercial and technology team at Mills & Reeve, and I'm going to be your host for today. So just to introduce Kristen, she has a education sector background, which then has led her to 25 years in the technology sector with a focus on edutech. She's had leadership roles at multiple organisations, including Microsoft, the OECD, and TESOME. Kristen then founded Breakthrough Labs in November 2022, and Breakthrough Labs is an accelerator and community for some female-founded tech startups. And the idea is to help women get their ideas funded. Now, we've just got a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording the session today and it will be made available afterwards on our LinkedIn page. We're also going to ask for some questions at the end of the session. You can do that by using the Q&A box in the chat. And also, we're always very happy to hear any feedback if you've got that for us. There will be something sent round at the end of the event, so you can feedback that way as well. So, as I said, we're here today in conversation with Dr. Kristen Weatherby, and we're here to get some insights into her journey in technology and also some advice and insights in tech startups and her involvement in founding, helping fund those. We are, as I said, going to have some question time at the end, and we've also got a poll for you, but we'll come back to that and I'll ask the questions to start with. So first of all, Kristen, we're going to ask a little bit about your career journey to date. So firstly, how did you get into technology in the technology sector?
Okay, thanks, Sophie. It's really lovely to be here today. So I had kind of an accidental entry into the tech sector. I planned on being a teacher, which I was for a year, but I went to high school in the town next to where Microsoft was founded in Washington State. And it was very funny because I was heading off to graduate school to get my master's in teaching, which I got in Michigan. And it was right around the time that Windows 95 was being launched. And so all you saw everywhere was like the Start Me Up. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but the Rolling Stones, which were doing like the Start Me Up music. Microsoft must have paid a fortune for that. And so I purchased my first PC to go to graduate school. And then I taught for a year in Michigan and came back to Washington State and couldn't find a teaching job. So because I had grown up in the town next to where Microsoft was founded, I actually had babysat for a family the mother went on to be like the vice president in charge of Microsoft Office once I had been at Microsoft for a while. So I kind of used a Microsoft contact to get a job rather than being a supply teacher, because at age 23, I looked like I was about 12 and I thought I was going to get eaten alive in secondary schools. So I thought I'll just work at Microsoft for a year. And then I'll go try and find a teaching job again. And then I stayed for 14 years. So I never had that idea. Like I never would have thought about working in tech. I studied English and French in undergraduate, but my first job and all of my subsequent jobs, like I'm not a very techy person. So my first job was in one of the techiest parts of Microsoft, in Microsoft Research. And I was working with a bunch of computational linguists on how to turn their like natural language processing technology and research into a product. And at that point, I'm sorry to say, it was the grammar checker, which everybody hates. So I was one of the people working on the grammar checker for a year. And then Microsoft actually had a proper publishing company at that time. So I became an editor working on computer books, all those, how to use Microsoft Office type computer books. And then I spent most of my time actually working in what was the sales and marketing organization in education. So there was a massive ed tech global initiative that I worked on for most of the time I was there.
Great. I mean, it's nice to know that you don't have to be tech focused initially to be able to exploit those kind and work on those opportunities. It's about your interest and where it takes you.
Absolutely. And because it's funny, my master's thesis, because I was an English teacher, my master's thesis was about teaching grammar. And I had a strong linguistics background, also having French. And so because of that, I got the job in Microsoft Research. It's just there's a lot of jobs in tech for people without tech backgrounds.
Great, excellent. So then the second question is, what obstacles have you faced along the way, and how have you managed to overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my biggest obstacles that hit me right off the bat without me even realizing it was an obstacle was the fact that I was coming from education, really quite naive, and to getting a job in tech. And I just didn't understand how to stick up for myself or negotiate a salary or do anything. When you're becoming a teacher, your salary is this when you start out, and there's no room to argue, and it's not very much. And then when I had, my first interview and hiring experiences at Microsoft, I didn't know, I thought it was a great salary, and I didn't know that I should be fighting for something more and that I deserved more. And so it wasn't until I'd been there several years that I got a manager who said, "You're not making anywhere near as much money as everybody else on my team. And I need to figure out a way to get you up to that level because this is ridiculous. This is the work you're doing and you should be up here." And I had absolutely no idea. One of the other things I think that's really tough, and I've experienced this at Microsoft working in education and like seconding teachers to my team or working with teachers, is in schools, the culture in this country and in the US is you're not supposed to stand out as a teacher. Like, it's not culturally acceptable. But at Microsoft, I mean, the way you get ahead is by differentiating yourself and also making your manager look good. So you have to kind of figure out how to play the game in that culture. And that was a real learning experience as well. But I think the other thing, which I see a lot with the female founders that I work with, is this idea of being the only woman in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't at Microsoft in the early days, but I was there in the mid 90s, and it was still pretty male dominated. And I remember, I obviously wasn't very technical, but I remember when I was working on like using really technical beta type tools as part of Microsoft Research. And so they weren't mainstream. So they were constantly crashing my computer. And I had to call up, at that point, you called up the Microsoft help desk. And I remember I just felt completely inferior all the time because it would always be really techie men on the line who couldn't believe I didn't understand what was going on with my own computer, first of all. But then also being in meetings in a room full of men, it's really difficult to kind of make yourself heard and have the courage to like speak up. And this is something, again, that I see there's research that shows with female founders that when they go to events that are majority male, there's like a 75% less chance that they're actually going to speak up. So it's really, when I worked at the publishing company, there were more women and it was much more comfortable because actually it wasn't really tech, it was publishing. So that gave me a little bit more confidence, I think, and helped me find myself. But it is really, it can be a really tough environment.
And did you feel like you had much support from the people you were working with to kind of help you get your voice heard, or is it something that you kind of had to develop yourself over time?
I did. I think I developed it probably myself over time. Although I have to say, Microsoft was an amazing place to work and there was a lot of professional development. And so when it was probably year 5 of my time there, or 4, when I started doing a lot more speaking and getting a lot more training about public speaking. And it was through that, I think, that I gained a lot more confidence to just speak up.
And do you think that's the kind of thing that would benefit people generally? I mean, not always, but I think typically a lot of founders have a great idea and they do have the technical knowledge, but they might not necessarily be so used to selling and presenting it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I see continually that I'm always really surprised at is really confident, not just women, but really confident people who are really experts in their field and very good at what they do. And they are petrified of speaking in public or speaking up at all. And I'm always really surprised at that. And I feel very, very lucky. One of the things that Microsoft had was this, or they still have, is this executive briefing center, because as you can imagine, at the headquarters, they get visitors from, all over, people that want to visit from all over the world. And the executive briefing center was for royalty or C-suite level people that were visiting. And I was one of the people that was trained to speak on education, because there were very few people that could do that. And lots of times guests wanted to hear that. And you had to go through the most rigorous training to be able to speak at this level. And it was torture. I mean, it was weeks and weeks of training and videoing and all of this stuff so you could see yourself and learn what annoying things you did with your hands or whatever. It was terrible. And then on top of that, when I started speaking more publicly and speaking with the media, I had really intense media training, because Microsoft was not, at that time was going through antitrust difficulties and was not, a media darling. And so any interview with any Microsoft employee could easily turn quite ugly. So I had so much training. And, even though it took a lot of time and it was really difficult to watch, so much difficult to watch yourself, it was so, so beneficial. And I've seen, I went to a big pitch event for one of the big angel investor networks. And I watched the pitch event, and you could really see the difference in the 9 founders who were pitching, of those who were really good speakers, regardless of whether their business idea was the best one there. They definitely got the most attention afterwards. And then I remember the one that I went to that really sticks out. There was a woman founder who was, an MD, a really serious researcher. She had clinical trials on what her idea was, but she wasn't able to communicate it in a way that the audience understood. And I remember watching her afterwards talking with, I thought her product was the best one there. And I remember watching her afterwards talking with a potential investor who came up and didn't understand the science, and she couldn't explain it in a way that he understood. And it's just like, you have to know your audience. You have to be able to communicate, or else, your idea is just not gonna fly.
Yeah. And then I guess the flip side to obstacles is, what has been your career highlight or highlights? Because I'm assuming you've got more than one.
Yeah, it's funny. I always say that, everything I learned at Microsoft, which is interesting to think about, because I worked, fairly serious places post Microsoft, but I remember, being at the OECD, and it's a lot of researchers and academics and civil servants who just hadn't had the kind of training and professional development and mentoring and all of this through their career that I had in the previous 14 years at Microsoft. But I really did, I traveled the world with Microsoft. I do say I was kind of there in the good old days. I went everywhere. I was in Cambodia, I was in Egypt, I was visiting schools and government and speaking with students and teachers on nearly every continent. It was just such an amazing learning experience. But just the experience of working there, I think at that time was quite interesting, especially being in the US. It was quite different when I came over to the UK and was working in just in the subsidiary. But in the US, the headquarters is quite amazing, and it was built in the 80s to have the feel of a university campus.
Right.
So there were lots of buildings connected by walking trails and little lakes and little forests and stuff, and it was lovely. And you could catch a shuttle bus that took you to a different building if you wanted to go there, and each building had their own cafeteria with highly subsidized meals and great food and everything. And they had football pitches and baseball fields and all that. But it was designed, really, they were hiring young people and they wanted them to stay at work. And so, at Christmas, there were post office set up, so you didn't have to stand in the big long queues at the post to send your gifts. There was dry cleaning. There was a fantastic gym where you can get your car washed. It was the best. It was really, really great. And I had the good fortune, actually, to have a few meetings with Bill Gates when I was there, when he was still working there. And that was just unbelievable. It's interesting because the buildings were pretty standard, all the Microsoft buildings on the main campus, and Bill's was no exception. He had kind of his own floor in one particular building. And one of the perks that we all had were these big coolers with 57 at the time, 57 different kinds of free drinks. And so, you grab like a can of sparkling water or whatever. And I remember when the day that I had to meet with Bill, I didn't realize that I was going to have to meet with Bill. He was doing a big announcement at a government leaders forum that we were holding in Edinburgh, funny enough, and at Holyrood House, at the Parliament. And I had to go with, my boss was like, you have to come with me, because if he asked me a question about this thing he's announcing, which I had developed, I'm not going to know how to answer it, and I'm not going to be there in a room with Bill and not have the answer. So I kind of got pulled into the meeting last minute, and there were only a few of us in there. And it was this, like his suite of offices was exactly the same. It looked like everybody else's, office. He had his own conference room. We all grabbed a can of soda on the way in, whatever, and had this meeting with him. And you kind of feel, I felt like, this man doesn't know who I am. He's never going to remember me, all of that. But I made it through the meeting unscathed. And I remember we went to Edinburgh, and, this was weeks later, and I was in a press conference with him, and he was asked a question that was directly relevant to something I had said in the meeting. And he quoted me back to me. I mean, he's an absolute genius. So it was incredible. But then a few years later, I was working in Paris, and I had the opportunity to have a meeting with the Secretary General of the OECD. And the OECD is like the opposite of Microsoft. It's this big think tank policy organization housed in a Rothschild chateau in the 16th arrondissement of Paris. And the Secretary General at that time was a former finance minister from Mexico. And everybody dresses, business formal every day, whereas Microsoft was like really quite casual. And so we go to the Rothschild Chateau, again, a small group of us for this meeting with the Secretary General. And it's in this like ornate wood paneled, high ceilinged room with like a big long wooden table, and waiters serving espresso in, porcelain demi-tasse cups. I just thought, this is like I'm on another planet. It was just completely different. So the opportunities I've had to, to meet people and experience those things that most people haven't gotten to are just, it's such an amazing, amazing learning experience.
It sounds great. So that's obviously a bit about your career and your journey, but I guess it'd be helpful for the audience to turn a little bit to your insights about the industry, and particularly your kind of role now in looking at helping startups get funded. So firstly, what would your advice be to building a successful startup? Any kind of key tips and things people should be thinking about and looking at?
Yeah, I mean, this is so hard. It's funny because I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a former Microsoft exec who has been like an 11-time startup founder. And he told me that, 6 of those startups exited. And so, he's very, very experienced. And his advice to me when I told him about what I was doing to help female founders was, do you know what? It's so much easier just not to even never take funding, never get equity, never give away equity, just do something techie and sell it. Like he said, there's so much great tech. He's very AI focused. And honestly, in the investment world is still very excited about AI. But he said, and he raised a lot of this money in kind of happier times for investment. This is a really, really tough time right now. But there is something to be said for the advice of try not to take any money if you don't have to. And I know, even not in the tech space, I know the founder of the Uni pizza ovens quite well, and they bootstrapped and did a Kickstarter and all of that so that they didn't have to give away equity, and they have, an incredibly successful product-based business now. So if you don't have to, I have seen this with female founders quite a bit, that they're looking to raise funds and give away equity for things like, marketing money and I'm just like, where else can you find the money so you don't have to give away a share of your business? But I think in addition to working at Breakthrough Labs and kind of helping, or to founding Breakthrough Labs and helping women deal with the barriers that they face that are unique to women in raising funds and starting a business, I'm also a scout for a Ada Ventures VC firm. And so I have this other side of the coin of what investors are looking for at this point. And one of the most important things, I think, and I also saw this working with ed tech startups as well, is that you have to find a real problem that exists and identify that problem and really do research on what the best solution is to that problem. And I always encourage people to look at academic research as well, especially in education technology. You know, what else is out there in that space? What have people done that's been successful? What have they learned that you can avoid any pitfalls? But you have to have, investors are looking for a really passionate founding team that has a real connection to the problem that they're trying to solve. And I know founders who, maybe their co-founder started the company and they've been brought in later as a co-founder, and they struggle to find their own kind of connection to the problem. But this is one of the things that we work on with Breakthrough Labs is storytelling and helping founders find their own origin stories. You need to have that story. My background's education technology, and I hadn't started a company before I started Breakthrough Labs, but I have a story of why this became important to me and why I felt like I could do something about it and why this is the right solution right now. So I would say you really need to find and investigate a problem that you think you can help with and you're uniquely positioned to help with. But one of the other things I think that investors look for too is, who do you surround yourself with? Who else is on that team and how are they going to help you? How do they provide skills that you don't have? And if you don't have, early stage founders don't have big teams, do you have an advisory board? Do you have advisors that are helping you, connecting you with their networks, providing you with kind of knowledge that you might not have on your own? And that's one of the things as well that's really hard for early stage founders to find is advisors. So, and then to understand how they can pay them. And so a lot of times they don't have any budget to pay them, and the investors don't like it if you give away equity early. So that's one of the things actually that we're going to launch with Breakthrough Labs is a service where we partner with big companies like the Microsofts of the world to provide their senior leaders as advisors for free for female founders. So I'm really excited about that because it solves a lot of problems. Yeah. The other thing that I would say for startups in particular is when I interviewed female founders and when I still talk to female founders, and I think this applies to any founder of any gender, is you really have to be resilient. It can be a very lonely journey, and people tell you no a lot more than they tell you yes. And everybody gives you feedback, and there's a lot of people that think your idea is not going to work, and you have to keep going. You have to find that in yourself to keep going and understand, you have to believe in the why and believe in your idea so that you can persevere. So I think those are some basic principles just on starting the business. But there's tons and tons of help out there. There's so much help for free through local councils, like in Oxfordshire. There's the Local Enterprise Partnership, and there's the BIPC centers affiliated with the British Library. There's lots of free help in this country that can get you started.
I guess it's just sometimes knowing how to find that help and where to go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it is, you're right. And knowing what is kind of quality and what's not. And it is really challenging. Yeah.
Right. And then I think, what are investors looking for from founders? I know you've talked about it a little bit as part of the answer to the previous question, but are there any specific things that you think founders are currently looking for early stage funding for startups?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really tricky is when founders really need to do their homework on investors and really understand first of all, what the investment thesis of each investor is and what they tend to focus on, as well as the business model of that particular investor. How are they looking to get returns? And is your startup going to provide returns fast enough or big enough for that particular investor? If you go through, like, a lot of startups that I work with are interested in angel investment because they're interested not only in kind of early stage investment at kind of lower amounts, and they're maybe not going to scale as quickly and as much as even like an early stage pre-seed VC fund would require. But they also want a little more advice. So they want that support that an angel investor will provide or can provide. So they're looking for someone that can help them, and likewise, the angel investor is looking for an area where they have skills or a certain level of expertise and can help. But I think the biggest problem that I see, even talking to as a scout and talking to startups that come to me and are interested in submitting their pitch to Ada Ventures, is they aren't going to scale enough, and they aren't going to scale fast enough to provide. I mean, Ada Ventures says this on all of their documentation, but they want you to have over 1 billion users in the next 10 years so that you can scale, so that you can provide the returns that they need. And this kind of stuff is really, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it needs to be a global scale. So you really, as a founder, need to do your homework and really understand, and not just kind of look at the total addressable market and say, oh, I'll take 10% of that. That'll be what I get. That'll be what I'm able to reach. And investors are kind of savvy to that as well. And they know that that's not always believable. The other things, I think, especially with tech, that founders should think about and that investors look for is defensibility and scale, in addition to scalability, but defensibility. Is it really easy for someone else to take your idea? And with tech, sometimes it is. And if it's not easy for someone to take your idea, is the market already too crowded? Are there a lot of competitors, and maybe they don't do exactly what you do, but they're still going to take your market share? So you really need to think about where you sit in that market as well. And it's pretty unbelievable when startups have a pitch deck that say, unless they have some kind of niche patented tech that no one else has thought of, fine. But it's pretty unbelievable when they say there's no other competitors. So you need to have a really good picture, or at least demonstrate that you have a really good picture of the marketplace. And you have to have an idea of how your investor will get their returns. So how will you exit? What is your plan for exiting? All of those things need to be considered, as well as your team and your problem. And
Great. So I've got one final question for you before we open it up to the audience. But as part of this, we're going to ask the audience to do a poll as well. We're going to turn this final question into a poll. So we can kind of see if you, from your perspective, are coming up with similar responses to what we get from the audience. And that question is, what one thing do you think could be done to encourage more women into technology? And we're just going to keep the poll open while you're talking, and then we'll just have a quick look and see what the responses are at the end. Now, just for the audience, it's free text, so you can put whatever you like in there. So we will look at that and feedback on it. But yeah, Kristen, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, with a background in education, my answer is going to be something needs to happen, and I think more needs to happen in schools, because as I said, I mean, this was 1 million years ago, but I had absolutely no idea of the possibilities of working in tech without a tech background, and B, the kinds of jobs that were available in tech. And I think that's even more relevant now with the emergence of generative AI and prompt engineers who are writing the prompts for ChatGPT to get the best kinds of results, or all these jobs that we haven't even considered yet as a possibility. I think that's just fascinating. So I think having more connections with schools and industry in terms of people coming into schools talking about the possible careers in tech for girls and boys, for everyone at a really early age, because in this country you have to choose your GCSEs and A levels so early, so you have to make these decisions, even if it's not maths and science. You want to what I always want to encourage more girls into STEM anyway. But the other thing too is, in the past 3 weeks or past few weeks, I went to Meta's offices in London last week. I'm going to Google later today, and I was at AWS, and just going to those spaces, I mean, they're pretty cool. It's every time I go to a space like that, I think, why exactly did I leave tech? Because it's such a cool place to work, and the environment is so great, and it's so vibrant and energetic. And yes, you work like a lunatic a lot of times, but I'm working like a lunatic anyway. And so I think those kinds of partnerships with industry that allow, and it doesn't have to be big tech either. I've been to a lot of startups with really cool offices and small companies, and it's just helping kids understand what's possible and see, what could my career be? It doesn't have to be a job that I've already heard of. It can be something that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, and I guess obviously we're focusing on technology, but for any sector, it brings it more to life if kids actually get to see it, what it looks like day to day, what it actually means, rather than fancy job titles or
Yeah,
things in the background.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing I think too is some of the kind of research facilities in universities and elsewhere that you kind of don't even realize are on your doorstep. I mean, it wasn't until I started working with tech founders that I realized that I could go to Didcot, to the big like science space labs and there's a European Space Agency half an hour from my house. I had absolutely no idea. So I found it really interesting that it these kinds of jobs are also on your doorstep, and these kinds of careers are right around you. And if you had an open day for a school at the European Space Agency, or an open day at UCL has an Institute of Making attached to their College of Engineering, how cool is that? That's just fantastic. So
Yeah. Great. So I'm just looking at some of the feedback that we've got in the poll, and quite a lot of it does align with what you've been suggesting, Kristen. So we've got starting education earlier in schooling, encouraging early involvement in schools, more education and encouragement from schools. So I guess it is that outreach, experience, ability to get involved. We've also got some things though that's slightly different. So, for example, less use of jargon. So, is it putting people off that that there's lots of terms that if you've not been involved, you just think, I don't know what this is, I don't know what it means, and kind of making it more accessible that way. We've also got, so demystifying what tech is. So perhaps that's slightly what you're talking about, the lots of different ways that you can get involved, what the roles are. It's not perhaps that stereotype of somebody sat using equipment doing something very specific. We've also got some visibility points. So visibility of different routes into technology. There's lots of different ways to do it. And also visibility of female tech role models. So obviously that's what we're trying to do a bit today, but obviously it is something that would be nice to widen down to younger level, and it's not just at once you get to the startup and idea stage. It's actually throughout your life as you're growing up, seeing more people in those roles. It's representation.
Yeah, and I have to say, with my answer about schools, this shouldn't be one more thing that's put on schools. This should be something that they have to find funding and time for, because they don't even have funding and time for the curriculum as it exists. It should be something that's driven by government and driven by industry. I mean, when the UK, or England especially, adopted a new computing curriculum back in, I think, 2015, because there's a dearth of computer science graduates and people studying computing. And they didn't want to send all the computer science, work off to other countries. They want it to be done in-house. But there's no time within the curriculum. There's not adequate training for the teachers to be able to teach this curriculum. That curriculum starts at reception. And so there's so many activities that can be done with tiny, tiny kids to think about computational thinking and all these fun, jargon type terms, but fun, demystifying this, the way you think about technology and the way you can, algorithmic thinking that can then lead you to working in a quite techie role. But it's one of the first things, along with music and everything, that is stripped from individual school practice because nobody's trained to deliver it, and there's no time and no money. So that's my little soapbox on that.
Well, it also seems like that this is a generation that will have been brought up their entire lives with tech as well. So it seems like a missed opportunity to not get them involved really early in a way that we might have not necessarily had that opportunity to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for all of those. So now I'm just going to open it to the audience, and if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Kristen directly, feel free to put those in the chat, and we've got a few minutes left that we can answer those. Oh, we're just starting to come through. So the first question we've got is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, yeah. I think I would tell my younger self to stop feeling like an imposter. There were so many times in my career where I felt like, well, for example, with applying for the job at the OECD, I was here working at Microsoft in the UK and knew that I wanted to do something different. And there was this great job running their teacher survey, which is the world's largest survey of teachers. And a friend of mine from Microsoft in Denmark sent it to me and said, you should apply for this. And I immediately looked at it and thought, and I said to her, I'm not fully qualified for this role. And she said, her response to me was, when would a man ever say that? And so I applied for the job and I got it. But there's so many different times where I maybe wouldn't have taken that chance, or would have felt like, oh, I'm not really the best person to do this. And I should just have jumped right in because I'm a hard worker. I'm, not stupid. I can do this just as well as anybody else can. And so I would have told myself to really stop feeling like an imposter.
Second question we've got is, what was the key trigger point or event that inspired you to start Breakthrough Labs?
Do you know, I was doing I was consulting. So post OECD, I went to UCL and finished my PhD in ed tech, and then started working for my first accelerator there in education technology. And if I thought the move from Microsoft to the OECD was like, oh my gosh, the world is standing still, it's so slow. And then going to academia, I was like, oh God, I didn't think anything could be slower than the OECD. So I just thought, okay, academia is not my place. And so I left as a consultant and was working with startups all over the world, which was fantastic. And then working back with big tech, and I got a job. I got a consultant project with the French government, with two different areas in the French government. And I was part of looking at kind of their teaching and technology strategy post-COVID, but then also working with research institutes and their startup infrastructure in creating a better kind of system and support for tech startups, especially in education in France, which was fascinating. And it was there that I saw, France wants to come out ahead in the tech world, ahead of Germany, ahead of the UK, and they are really putting their money where their mouth is. So I kind of looked at all the support they provided for government support at a local government level for especially female founders. And I was involved with an incubator in Paris where it was very easy for women to get government funding for their ideas, and then get supported by a 12-month incubator program that ended up providing them with a community that was a long-lasting community. They had another program to catch them on the other side when they were finished for the 12 months. And I kind of looked around the UK and thought, what have I seen here that looks like that? And so as I was digging into the research, and I saw all the research that, about why women face barriers to getting investment. And then I started doing my own research. And it was then when I was interviewing female founders and I heard the experiences that they have, which I still hear practically every day from a female founder, of how poorly they're treated, like honestly, harassed, propositioned, treated very rudely at a minimum. And this has happened to every founder I've encountered. And I just couldn't believe that things like this were still happening in 2023 and 2024, and felt like I just had to do something about it. So I knew, with my background in education and my experience working in accelerators, and this was the bit I could do. So, but I always knew it would kind of evolve from just an accelerator. So it's been a great journey and a huge learning experience for me. But I'm very passionate about the why, so I'm still going.
Great. And then I think we've got time for one final question, which is, how can women founders get more resilient to dealing with investors? For example, are accelerators or incubators a good way to help with these, or do you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is specifically one of the things that I'm trying to address with Breakthrough Labs. So it's not for me, it's not only about, like, in the Breakthrough Labs Accelerator and in the online community that we're launching in a few months, we have pitch practices over and over and over again, where we talk to women not only about what their pitch should look like, and we practice with them and ask them really quite negative questions, so that the first time they're experiencing those questions and having to come up with an answer is not in the actual pitch. But we also give them a lot of advice and guidance on, you as female founders need to think about the investors that you want to work with. So if you're treated poorly in a pitch, do you really want to continue working with that person? Do you want them on your board? Do you want to have to, be dealing with them for years? So we talk to women about those kinds of things as well. The other thing that I think is really important, which I take from the model I just mentioned in France, is this idea of community and not feeling like I said earlier, like you're the only woman in the room. And so it's what I'm trying to build with Breakthrough Labs is a place where women can meet other founders like themselves, regardless of, what industry the tech is in. They will have had similar experiences. And so if a female founder then has a question of, gosh, how do I deal with this problem? They can find someone else that's had that experience before, but also they can find other people to celebrate their successes with them and cry over their losses or whatever it is. I'm part of several WhatsApp group communities, which serve some of those purposes, but are, a bit limited. And it is really nice. Like the other day on one of the groups, a woman had a really bad experience with an investor and put it on the chat and immediately got all sorts of support from other women. And so that it's that kind of, I think some accelerators and some communities do provide that. We're really trying to provide that kind of support in lots of different ways through Breakthrough Labs.
And I guess if you are a female involved in startups and you want to get involved and add people to groups and introduce them to people, that just increases and grows that community that's out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really interesting to hear everything that you've got to say. Like I said, this will be recorded and put on our LinkedIn page so people can come back and look at it. I know, Kristen, we've linked to you, and there's a QR code for you on the LinkedIn page if people want to get in touch with Kristen directly at Breakthrough Labs. So thank you everybody for attending today, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.